Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack a truly fascinating microscopic battlefield that exists right inside our own bodies, chronic inflammation. Now, we all know the acute inflammatory response, right? You get a cut and you feel the heat, the swelling, that immediate rush of immune cells to the injury. It's totally normal. But what happens when that biological fire just doesn't go out? What happens when our own defense system essentially sets up a permanent camp inside our tissues? Well, we're going to explore exactly how those battle lines are drawn at the cellular level.
Okay, let's quickly take a look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with part 1, the double-edged sword. Then, we'll meet the immune army, explore the granuloma prison, dive into healing and scarring, and finally, we'll unpack the cancer connection.
All right, diving right into Section 1, the double-edged sword.
So unlike acute inflammation, which usually clears up pretty quickly, chronic inflammation is this persistent, ongoing war that can last for weeks or even months. And the really wild thing here is that 3 different things are happening all at the exact same time: tissue injury, active inflammation, and attempts at repair. It's kind of like trying to rebuild a house while it's literally still on fire. Your body is desperately fighting off the enemy and trying to heal the collateral damage simultaneously.
Now, you might be wondering what actually triggers this unending war. Well, it usually starts with something the body simply can't get rid of. We're talking persistent invaders like certain mycobacteria, fungi, or parasites. It can also be caused by hypersensitivity diseases where your immune system just basically overreacts, or from prolonged exposure to toxic agents. And here is why this matters so much to us. Chronic inflammation isn't just some quiet background process. It's absolutely crucial to understand because it's a key driver in massive real-world diseases like Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, and even cancer. This is literally about our long-term health and survival.
Moving on to Section 2, meet the immune army.
Let's actually meet the cells fighting this microscopic war. This cellular army infiltrates our tissues to eliminate threats, but they can definitely cause some serious collateral damage along the way. We've got quite a diverse roster here. The macrophages, they are the absolute dominant generals of chronic inflammation. They completely direct the flow of the battle. Then we have T and B lymphocytes, who act as our amplifiers and tacticians. Plasma cells actually develop from those B cells to pump out targeted antibodies. If the invader happens to be a parasite or an allergen, eosinophils step up to the plate. And finally, mast cells are hanging out throughout our connective tissues, ready to respond, especially if you're someone prone to allergic reactions.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is how our generals, the macrophages, can split into 2 completely different roles: destroyers and rebuilders. Depending on the signals they receive, it's like they put on entirely different uniforms. M1 macrophages are classically activated for war, while M2 macrophages are alternatively activated for peace and repair. And this is beautifully illustrated right here, showing the exact chemical pathways our immune system uses to flip these macrophages between fighting and repairing. When a macrophage encounters microbes or a chemical signal like IFN gamma, boom, it becomes an M1. It starts pumping out reactive oxygen species and lysosomal enzymes, which is essentially biological bleach to kill off bacteria. But if it receives signals like interleukin-13 or interleukin-4, it becomes an M2. It actually stops fighting and starts releasing growth factors to stimulate tissue repair and fibrosis. It is just an incredibly calibrated system of escalation and de-escalation.
But the generals don't act alone, right? The lymphocytes are the tacticians calling in reinforcements to amplify this battle. Specifically, CD4+ T cells break into distinct subsets to handle different kinds of threats. Th1 cells are the ones secreting that IFN gamma to activate those M1 destroyer macrophages. Th2 cells send out signals to recruit the parasite-fighting eosinophils. And Th17 cells send out chemokines to drag neutrophils right back into the fight. It's a highly coordinated network of chemical communication.
Let's jump into Section 3, the granuloma prison.
So think of this as the immune system building a biological maximum security prison out of its own cells. When macrophages and T cells face an enemy they just can't destroy, like certain really stubborn foreign bodies or persistent microbes, they don't just give up. No way. They surround it. They tightly pack themselves together, attempting to contain what they cannot kill, effectively walling it off to protect the rest of the body.
And under a microscope, this prison is completely unmistakable. Activated macrophages literally fuse their bodies together to form these giant cells, physically trapping the infection. If you look at those massive structures with multiple nuclei clustered around the edges, those are called Langhans-type giant cells. And right in the center of this typical tuberculous granuloma, there's an area of central necrosis. That's a dead zone where the intense battle has totally destroyed the local tissue. It's a really desperate, dramatic defense mechanism by our bodies.
All right, Section 4, Healing and Scarring.
Once the battle finally starts to cool down, the post-war reconstruction phase begins. Tissues will absolutely try to completely regenerate if they can, but if the damage is just too severe, they have to resort to biological duct tape, scar tissue. This whole process kicks off with our M2 macrophages releasing growth factors. Then the body hits a fork in the road. If the tissue still has the capacity, it'll proliferate surviving cells to perfectly replace what was lost. That's regeneration. But if the supporting framework is totally destroyed or the cells just can't divide, the body lays down connective tissue instead.
This visual perfectly contrasts the two paths. On one hand, a mild superficial injury heals cleanly. It only damages the top epithelial layer, so the cells simply divide and bam, it's as good as new. But on the other hand, a severe injury digs deep down into the connective tissue. Because the body can't perfectly rebuild that incredibly complex architecture, it rushes fibroblasts in to deposit collagen, resulting in a permanent scar. The body prioritizes patching the hole as fast as possible to keep you alive, even if it means sacrificing perfection.
Now, not all organs are created equal when it comes to repair. The liver, for example, is exceptionally good at that first method, regeneration. It uses complex signaling to literally regrow its own mass. Kupffer cells, which are the liver's resident macrophages, release signals like interleukin-6 to prime the surviving liver cells. Then growth factors step in and prompt those cells to transition into an active state of proliferation. It's just an extraordinary capability, making the liver a total masterclass in tissue regeneration.
However, as we know, reconstruction isn't always perfect. Several real-world factors completely dictate how well we heal. Poor blood flow, a lack of proper nutrition, or even the use of steroids can halt healing entirely. If the body doesn't form enough of that initial biological patch, called granulation tissue, the wound can literally pull apart. That's a pretty terrifying complication known as wound dehiscence. On the flip side of that, you can have overactive repair, where the body deposits way too much collagen. This leaves behind massive, raised, excessive formations known as hypertrophic scars or keloids.
And that brings us to Section 5, the cancer connection.
This is perhaps the most surprising part of our explainer. We really have to ask, how does this highly protective, inflammatory response end up helping tumors grow? We've learned that inflammation is meant to heal us and protect us, so how in the world does it become an accomplice to one of our deadliest enemies?
Well, it turns out cancers are incredibly sneaky. They can manipulate the very inflammatory cells we just talked about, hijacking the tissue repair process to feed and spread themselves. Think about what M2 macrophages do. They release growth factors and stimulate new blood vessels to heal a wound. Well, a tumor essentially acts like a wound that never heals. It completely tricks the inflammatory cells into releasing factors that promote the tumor's own cell proliferation. It uses the immune system's angiogenesis signals to build a dedicated blood supply for itself, and it even uses inflammatory enzymes to chew through surrounding tissue, activating the tumor's ability to invade and metastasize. It's pretty wild.
But there is good news here. Understanding this dark twist has actually led to some amazing new treatments, proving that we can actively disrupt this cancer-inflammation alliance. While perfectly understanding how tumors manipulate these cells is still a bit elusive, ongoing research is making huge strides. For instance, COX-2 inhibitors, which specifically target these inflammatory pathways, are now approved for treating patients with FAP. That's a condition that strongly predisposes individuals to cancer. By cutting off that tumor-induced inflammation, we can literally starve the process.
So, as we continue to decode the immune system, the ultimate question remains: how can we master this biological battlefield to heal rather than harm? We've seen today how our cells dynamically shift from warriors to medics, how they build biological prisons, and how their incredible power can sadly be hijacked by disease. But understanding this cellular dynamic doesn't just explain pathology, it points the way to future cures. Can we learn to perfectly dial up the immune system to fight off invaders, and then definitively switch it off before it aids in cancer or chronic disease? That right there is the frontier of modern medicine. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll catch you next time.